Good morning. So glad to see you. Isn't it a beautiful day? Great day. So make sure your cell phone is in the off position, please. And no matter who you are or where you are in your spiritual journey, you are celebrated here. All right. Okay, take a deep breath. If it helps close your eyes, you can do that. Just be open, be here. And may grace be in our heads and in our thinking. May grace be in our eyes and in our seeing. May grace be in our ears and in our hearing. May grace be in my mouth and in my speaking. May grace be in our hearts and in our understanding, and may grace be at our ends and at our departing. And because of what we do here, may we all be able to grow in patience, which is a skill, tolerance, which is needed, kindness, and love. I discovered a few years ago that I have a form of Asperger's. And Asperger's, as you know, is a neurological condition that's on the spectrum. It manifests in a variety of ways. But the diagnostic label for my condition is a German word that I cannot pronounce. I've taken German lesson this morning, but I still can't pronounce it. But we have a German-speaking person who is going to tell us, George Schroth is going to pronounce this word for us.
First of all, I want to confirm that I did not make the diagnosis. There's many other diagnoses in the register of diagnoses, but I'm not claiming that one. In any event, this is a compound word. The first part is Witz, W-I-T-Z, which is a joke, and Sucht, which Bill has a little trouble saying because it's got an Arabic sound, Sucht. And Sucht means addiction, so it means joke addiction.
I have it. I do. Got it. As a matter of fact, when I was researching this again, I found out that I could get and actually bought a T-shirt. It's a sweat. It's a hoodie. This diagnosis, by the way, Dr. Schroth, was first found by a German neurologist in 1888. That's what I've been able to find. And one diagnosis, I can't read it all to you because it's very unflattering. It says it's a set of rare neurological symptoms characterized by a tendency to make puns and to tell inappropriate jokes. This is so unkind. Or pointless stories in socially inappropriate situations. And it goes on to say some other things that are even more unflattering than that. But it's true for me. And it has helped me understand so much of my behavior because I've had this behavior stretching back as long as I can remember into my earliest childhood. And it's just a relief to know about for me. For other people, not so much. But when I'm walking down the halls here and I stick my head into someone's office, I am much more likely to tell a pun than to say hello. It's just there. It's like, you know, it's a form of Tourette's in a way. It just comes out. And it is not honestly that I look for deliberately funny situations. I just see them. I just hear them. The other day, a friend of mine was sharing with me his concern that his aging grandmother needed his more constant attention, and he said he called her all the time, so much so that he had her on speed dial. And I said, "Oh, that's a form of Instagram." Oh, you're in for a lot more. We live in this high-rise over here where our apartment's on the 14th floor. We face west and north, and we get these most beautiful sunsets every day. Every day, usually while I'm cooking, right in the most critical part of the meal, which I need to start timing differently, Sherry will say, "Bill, come, look," and I'll go see the sunset. And I found out that the sunset has a Doppler effect, like sound that gets louder when it gets closer to you. And airplanes that land, they go faster when they get close to you, or seem to. And the sun, when it gets down to the horizon or the earth turns, it just goes very quickly. It hits the horizon and then pretty soon it's gone. And one day we were standing there watching it, and Sherry said, "Bye, son." And I said, "That's what the mother buffalo said to her child going off to college." "Bye, son." I told that joke to Jeff McDonald at a gathering last night, and he said, "You know what buffaloes celebrate every 200 years? The bicentennial." The Bible begins with a pun, baseball pun. In the beginning. So years ago, I began to notice phrases that we use every day that turn out to me to be really funny. And when I began my private practice in 1973, I began to write these phrases down. Now, I don't know why. Now I do, because of my diagnosis. And at the time, I call them aphorisms. And I want to share some with you. And I want to be clear, I am not making fun of anybody, because we all do this. I think the first one that I wrote down that I remember hearing through this filter is that I asked somebody why they had come to therapy, and they said, "I can't relate to the people I'm related to." I suggested to someone once that they take it easy. Just take it easy. I don't know, those of you who are familiar with recovery know that in recovery there are all these phrases that have really profound meaning when you consider them. Take it easy means don't seize, don't jerk, don't manipulate, just take it easy. And I suggested to somebody that they take it easy, and the response was, "Yeah, I need to do that. I'm going to force myself to relax." A wife said to her husband, "Something tells me there's something you aren't telling me." I was working with a woman once who was the height of acting out, very rebellious, outrageous behavior, and I said to her, "Do you ever get concerned about what other people might think about you?" And she said, "I don't care what the world thinks about me. I just hope my mother doesn't find out." I was seeing a couple once, and the husband said, "You know, the only real strain in our relationship comes from trying to be together." Yeah. We all know that one. A husband said to his wife, "From time to time, I'm completely reliable." A woman very frustrated with her husband in therapy said, "Would you please just tell me what you want?" And he thought for a good while, and then he said, "What I want is to be loved and to be left alone." Just a few others. When I realized how hard life is, things got easier. I don't think I can accomplish much unless I do more. Did I tell you about my bad memory? At the end of a session, someone said, "Everyone likes to hear a good listener." One person said, "Unlike most people, I'm just an average person." One said, "To be perfectly honest, I find it difficult to be perfectly honest." Why don't you have a daily spiritual practice? I'm too busy to have time for anything. That's funny. One woman said, "When I come to a turning point in my life, I just go straight ahead." And this one from a man who wasn't getting the girl that he wanted. He said to her, "You're going to suffer for it if I can't make you happy." Then this one is kind of painful, actually. "If I don't improve soon, I may have to stop getting you to help me." And as I looked at this collection, I've got hundreds of these things. And we're done. I mean, mostly. You're off the hook. But I noticed how many of them had to do with anxiety. One man said, when I asked him how he was doing, he said, "I haven't felt anxious for several weeks now." And that scares me. Perhaps, however, the best one in this category was a woman in a marriage that was very unsatisfactory to her. And she said, "You know, it is miserable to be with a nervous person, especially if you're the one who makes him nervous." That's our culture. We're with a bunch of scary people, and we contribute to making them scared. In 1947, W.H. Auden won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. And one reason for that was that in the mood following World War II, he wrote a poem called "The Age of Anxiety." He coined that phrase, "the age of anxiety." And I wonder what Auden would think of us now, after this much time has passed. Tom Robbins, one of my favorite authors, I wish he would write more, has a line in one of his novels that says, "This morning I woke up as I've awakened each morning since learning that terrible prayer, somewhat relieved and a little surprised to be alive." Jim Hollis, the Jungian analyst who used to live here, a writer of many good books, says that every day when each of us wakes up, we have two things sitting at the foot of our bed that we have to make a choice between. One is lethargy, and the other is anxiety. By the way, Tom Robbins, the prayer he was referring to is the one many of us were taught, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake," terrible thing to teach children, "I pray the Lord my soul to take." I do think there's a great wisdom to be gained by keeping death at hand, but that's another topic for another time. Because today what I want to do is speak to the anxiety that blankets our nation. People on the left are trying to point out how horrible, in their opinion, things will be if Donald Trump is reelected, while Trump and his supporters are using fear as their primary tactical weapon to gain support for their side. My contention is that we're all in the same raft, on the same boat, on the same waters, and so I've called this talk today, "Riding the Waves with Nervous Nellie." Now, this is the first of two-part teaching on anxiety and spirituality. Next week, I want to talk about theology and horror. What's the fascination in our country and culture? Because it's Halloween right after that. With horror movies and horror stories and all that. So we'll get into that next Sunday. I learned a long time ago that there's no reference in the scriptures, in what we call the Old Testament or New Testament, there's no reference where there's an appearance or an epiphany of God without being either preceded or followed by the phrase, don't be afraid, fear not. You cannot find one. And so I looked through the concordance that I have of the Bible to see, just to check out and see if that was true. And there are hundreds, I mean hundreds of usages of the word fear and afraid in our scripture, over and over and over again. Jesus, in a very provocative, challenging language, said to his disciples, "What are you frightened about? Don't you have any faith?" Now, I don't know about you, but my own personal experiences of the numinous, feeling that I was in some real sacred space, moment, time, event, have always been awesome. I remember as a child reading, as a teenager, reading Paul Tillich. And one of the books that affected me was a collection of his called The Shaking of the Foundations. Ooh. And he said in the writing of his, sermon of his, that spoke most to me and to many people who've heard the passage, that in order to make the journey, you need courage to be. I've also learned, because it's never worked for me, that telling someone who's frightened not to be is about the most useless thing you can do. Just don't be scared. Nothing to be scared of. It's just a Bengal tiger. So what are we to do? How are we to deal with this? When I was in seminary, we read Soren Kierkegaard, and Soren Kierkegaard's book was a book called Fear and Trembling, comforting theological insight. By the way, what's your guess about what's on the cover of the book? Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Terrifying story. Now, I have been taught since the beginning of my own life and teaching this doctrine that if you believe in Jesus as your personal Savior, you will be saved, and when you die, you will go to heaven instead of hell. And that doctrine didn't exist until the 14th century, maybe a little bit earlier. But if you point that out to people whose whole life has been a church-going experience of hearing that over and over and over, to give that up is a kind of terrifying experience. That's ironic, isn't it? That a teaching that should produce such a huge sigh of relief is met with, I'm not sure I feel safe letting that go. People are expressing this anxiety directly when they sometimes say to me, your teaching doesn't give me anything to hold on to. True. I've spoken in here many times because the experience is so vivid in my mind about the first day we were sent out into the hospital to visit patients, and all of us were so terrified. And the supervising psychiatrist said to us, "Don't be scared. Just be a non-anxious presence in the rooms where you go." None of us could do that. Well, we learned to, which is, I hope, the goal of this teaching today, but we didn't get there like that. One of my colleagues said, you got to feel the fear and do it anyway. In the Christian teaching in the Gospel of John, there is a line that says, there's no fear in love. That line gets abused and misused if it causes one who is legitimately frightened to feel, well, I must not be loving enough. So, I don't know if you went, but last week I preached here, and in the sermon, I told a story about remembering when I was about 4. I couldn't have been more than 4 because of where we lived. Standing on the back pew of the First Baptist Church in Portland, Tennessee, with my arm around my daddy's neck, singing a hymn. And the hymn was this one. Standing on the promises that cannot fail, when the howling storms of doubt and fear assail, by the living word of God I shall prevail, standing on the promises of God. And it goes on and on and on. There's another hymn I learned from that time that I also loved. I had no meaning. I was 4. I didn't know what these words meant. But I love to sing it. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms, leaning, leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Now, it's always been rather ironic to me that the religion of my youth, one that promises safety and security in its scriptures and its rituals, is responsible for so much fear in people and in the world. The lines in the hymns. Because what followed the singing of these hymns was fire and brimstone preaching. Now that was on the individual level. On the larger scale, once it gained power, Christianity, thanks to Constantine, became something to be frightened of. If you weren't a Christian, you had a choice. In Spain, you could convert, you could die, or you could leave. I was fortunate enough to do some training with Dr. David Burns. I think he's Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry at Stanford now. I'm not sure about that. I think that's where he ended up. But he owned the market on anxiety disorders in the United States. Written a lot of books about it. One of his best books is called When Panic Attacks. Great title, great book. Dr. Burns said that his experience was that everybody was afraid. All of us. He said, if you gave truth serum to everybody and just turned to say what was on your heart and mind to the person next to you, it would be something about what you're frightened of. And I told him after class one day that I didn't see that. I had not met Jim Hollis at that time or read anything. I said, I know a lot of people who don't seem fearful. And his response was, we either deny it, repress it, or resist it. And he said, the reason you know what I'm saying to you is true is that's what you do with your own fear. I think Hollis is right. Day after day, sometimes hour after hour, we have to decide, are we going to live in response to lethargy? Go back to bed? Spend all weekend feasting on Netflix series? Having another piece of chocolate? Or are we going to get up and deal with life in spite of our anxiety? Now, again, I don't know about you, but one of the first things I learned about myself when I got into analysis that I wasn't looking so much for the truth as I was looking for something that would help me to live comfortably with the way I already was. That may not be true for you. But D.H. Lawrence said, the world fears a new experience more than it fears anything, because new experience displaces old experience. Now you understand D.H. Lawrence and David Burns and others are not talking about new ideas. New ideas are a piece of cake. You can take a new idea and just pigeonhole it wherever you want to. But a new experience is something else. And humans, we don't like change. Someone asked me not long ago if, given the teachings that I offer in here, if I believed in miracles. And more specifically, the question was, do you believe in the resurrection? Parenthesis, this is not my notes. That's incorrect theological language. It's not, do you believe in the resurrection? That locates it back there, historically. The question that we should raise is, do we believe in resurrection? And I told this person that not only did I believe in it, that I'd seen it. And the response was one of incredulity, because they were located back there. Really? They were thinking of something physical? Really? I said, yes. Go to any AA meeting and you'll see resurrected people. People who will freely talk about the miracle of still being here. A true inner experience, like stepping into recovery, changes us. And most of us don't like change. So wise and useful spiritual teachings invite people into new experience, a new way of seeing. Now, when Jesus taught, it's clear that something happened, not for everybody, but some were left slack-jawed and eyes wide open with a wonder and hope that they didn't have before. And he didn't offer teachings to people who wanted quick and easy answers. He didn't offer teachings who were looking for people, that people were looking just to affirm their already held beliefs. Good news is about transformation, not intellectual assent. So we're still talking now about what in our present context it means to be riding on stormy waves in our current cultural situation with a multitude of nervous Nellies. I spend hours every week in companionship with people seeking clarity about living their lives right here and now, and many mention how scary our current cultural context is. And like me, they're looking for someone to say to them, everything is going to be okay. Don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. And where I'm heading in this talk is by saying it's the way we deal with our fears. It's dependent on how things are out there. We're doomed before we start because we don't control what goes on out there. Yes, we have some influence and we should use it. But nothing stays settled. And all you have to do for the illusion of control to be blown out of the water for you is to leave this talk in a few minutes, go get in your car, put the key in the ignition, and the battery's dead. Because whatever you had planned for the next 3 hours is gone. And even if it isn't, and you go to that perfect ideal brunch, that won't last. Nothing does. That's not a pessimistic outlook. The people who have held this have been some of the happiest people I have known. Which brings me to Thich Nhat Hanh, who says the only way to ease our fear and be truly happy is to acknowledge our fear and look deeply at its source. We can transform this fear. That's the good news. The bad news. I hate to bring this up. It is only by the practice. It is only by the daily practice of mindfulness that we can gain the courage to face our fears and no longer be pushed around about them. We can learn to root ourselves in the present moment, and we can look at the past in a different way, which will allow us to enter the process where we can transform the suffering we bring into the present from the past and into the future. Now, my own personal experience is that when we begin thoroughly to deal with our fear of our own physical death, a lot of other fears pass away. I think it's good to have death as a daily companion. I begin my daily spiritual practice, the part that I read every day. The first line is it, today may be the day that I die. May this awareness influence how I live the rest of this day. You never know. We can train ourselves, and it is the most difficult thing we ever do, to be present. And it is here in the present that we should look for, experience, and express what Jesus referred to as the rule of God. That phrase got translated into the kingdom of God, most unfortunate translation. But what Jesus meant was to create a community and a mindset of compassion, of joy, of forgiveness. That's what Jesus taught about. Now, just to be clear, a spiritual practice is where you commit to showing up and put yourself mentally and physically in a place that you can enter into with your whole heart, in which you assume the stance that offers the least resistance to your being overtaken by the experience of sacred mystery, which we are by our own powers powerless to create. I was reading just this morning in my practice. You have to have a daily spiritual practice. I mentioned that. Okay. That maybe one of the best spiritual practices you can have is to walk. To walk. Walk in nature. Walk in your neighborhood. Pay attention. The contemporary Christian movement sadly does not offer many opportunities for this, not even many examples of this. Almost, I'm not biting the hand that feeds me. This almost never happens in church. Because the qualities that are required for the transformation of our fear are three things. One is the quality of honesty. Truth-telling. Our culture is suffering from a lack of truth-speaking. All over. Honesty can be brutal. It doesn't have to be. But to tell somebody the truth sometimes is hard. The other quality for transformation is openness, and we can all be so guarded. You ever have somebody come up to you and say, "Can I offer you a bit of constructive criticism?" You notice what your internal response is, though. You say, "Sure." You're like that. And we have to have a willingness to undergo transformation that we're seeking. I cannot tell you how many times over the years I've heard people in recovery comment or ask, "Why can't the church be more like AA?" And the answer that I learned from one of my main mentors, Carlisle Marney, many years ago, is people go to AA with an honest acknowledgement about who they are. People, this is Marney, people go to church to be who they hope to God they look like they are. All right? We don't walk in here and say, hey, I'm Bill. I've got an honesty problem. I've got a darkness problem. I've got a fear problem. No, we come here to say, I got it all together. I'm doing just fine. Thank you. In AA, people go and they say, or whatever recovery community it is, they go and they say, I'm here because I hit bottom. I can't save myself. And I know I need a community of people where I can be honest and who will be supportive of me. People don't come to church and say, I'm blind, I need to see. I think I've heard Richard Rohr say, I couldn't find this, but I think I heard Richard Rohr say that on the Enneagram, the Enneagram number of the United States is a 6. And a 6 is a frightened personality. Sometimes 6s can be counterphobic 6s and be crazy dangerous. I think it's a major concern for many in our country right now is securing our borders. We have the most powerful military of any country in the world, and yet we are, as a country, insecure. And paradoxical as it seems, the more we invest in what I call the theater of fortress security, the less secure people feel. And people who act out of their fear of the past or of the future affect the present, each other, and then the larger society. And whatever the origin or reasons, we live in this culture of fear. So here's the thing. Given what I've said so far, I think right now 2 things are required for riding the sacred stream when it's stormy with Nervous Nelly. I looked and looked for the etymology of the phrase Nervous Nelly, but I couldn't find anything. It goes back something to the 1920s to refer to an American politician, and the wordsmiths say, whoever thought it up used it because it has good alliteration in it. So if we're going to ride the waves with Nervous Nelly, the first thing we have to do is each of us has to do his or her own personal work. I know, you think you already have. And maybe you have. Maybe you have. Since I've already 3 times now recurred to people in recovery, I want to continue to use that as an illustration for the process I'm trying to describe. People develop addictions for all kinds of reasons, mostly reasons of anxiety. I doubt there are many people in this room who have not, at some point in some days, said, good Lord, I'll be glad when the day's over, I need a drink. I need a hit, a gummy, or whatever it is now. We're uptight, anxious. And people are scared of pain. They're scared of not fitting in, not being able to relax, whatever. The list is endless. And then addicted, they become more frightened to give up what they're addicted to. This friend that has been saving them. Nervous Nelly, not wanting to do the work required to deal with what actually is going on, denies, represses, splits, projects, procrastinates, rationalizes, diverts. We shrinks got a lot of words for it. Because Nelly admits no faults, no needs, simple simply more guards to guard the castle walls. Health can be lost. Spouses can leave. Children vanish. Jobs disappear. Death comes. Or the cost of the addiction simply becomes too much. I can't keep doing this. And you be aware that when the psyche speaks, it does not do so with the tongues of angels. It bangs pots and pans. It seems like our world is going to collapse. Doors open that we have tried to keep shut for decades. Slowly the addict, and remember Hollis says we're all addicts, begins to realize that for all the problems we face, anxiety being the biggest problem is realizing that we made many of these problems for ourselves. As one of my colleagues put it, people in recovery begin to encounter the Zen-like wisdom that what we have become is now our chief obstacle. Sometimes it takes what looks and feels like the end of the world banging on the door for Nervous Nellie to open it up. And then we get to do what Thich Nhat Hanh said, greet the fear out there and say, come in. Let me give you a cup of tea. Let's visit. Or to put all this another way, learning that fear governs our lives and is behind the many coping strategies we have to manage it may not be a fun discovery, but it is the beginning of wisdom and freedom. All it takes to recover the integrity of our journey is to recognize that fear is the enemy, not others, not history, but plain old fear, our fears. So that leads to the second thing I want to say about how to understand Nervous Nellie within us and those around us. We're all afraid. Those we are afraid of are afraid. We are governed by politicians whose survival depends on stoking these fears and thereby dividing us from each other's. So one way forward is to recognize at the gut level something that Philo of Alexandria said thousands of years ago: be kind, for everyone you meet has a really big problem. Consequently, community building is the most important action we could possibly take. And in this world of granulated human beings, where we spend so much time on our devices, getting connected to each other is our most critical need. In love, there is no fear. But we don't have a chance to experience that love if we don't see each other and spend time with each other. If we see through the eyes of Jesus, I love what Jim, this is not my notes, but I love what Jim Finley says about if we could close our eyes and when we opened them, we saw the world as Jesus saw it, what would we see? And Finley says when we opened our eyes, we would see God. Because Jesus saw God in everything, saw God in everyone. So seeing through the eyes of Jesus, there are no walls. Now, is that naive? I don't think so. As my spiritual teachers, we wake up so we can go on dreaming. Think about it. all of us with long histories in church going, and some of you left churches because of this, have been taught the importance of believing the right stuff. And as I see it, our most basic need at this point is not belief but experience. We need spiritual practices that open the doors to new experiences. And this does not render God useless, but it does render us useful. In a universe and a globe without walls, God is the field. And borrowing from a Christian mystic from long ago, God does not do anything, but without God, nothing gets done. Now, there is a parable that the early followers of Jesus created. And it is important, at least to me, that you know this is a parable. This is not something that happened that it could have taken a video of and show on the 10 o'clock news. This is a story. It was created as a story. In the early Jesus movement, there was nothing to believe. There was everything to do about how you behaved, how you took care of widows and orphans and each other and welcomed the stranger and all that stuff. It wasn't until Constantine that the focus came on what to believe. In the Sermon on the Mount, there is nothing to believe. Nothing. Read it. In the Apostles' Creed, there's nothing to do. Just believe. So this story was created by the early Jesus community that wanted to help create revolutionary mystics. So here's the story. That's two parts, so you got to stick with it. So Jesus and his disciples are in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and a storm comes up. The boat is being swamped with water, and they are terrified. And Jesus is asleep in the front of the boat. And they wake him up, screaming. The story says they call him Master, but I wonder if they may not have used some other word. Would you wake up? Don't you care anything about us? So Jesus wakes up. In the story, he rebukes the storm, meaning he tells the waves, calm down. The storm calms down. And the disciples see this and they say, who is this guy? That even the wind and the waves obey him. Now, the story's not over yet. In doing spiritual work, we travel two paths simultaneously. We go deeper into ourselves and we go deeper into sacred mystery. Now, the mystics say that's one journey. Sometimes when I'm sitting with people and they're struggling with making a really big life-changing decision, they might ask, what should I do? And I don't know. I don't know. But I do have an answer for that. Pick the path that brings a bigger you into a bigger world. One of the clues to Christian nationalism is both bad theology and bad politics is that when you see people getting involved in a religious system that makes them smaller instead of bigger, you have every reason to question whether what they are involved in is opening them up to a greater mystery. Living life, going deep, seeing what is, experiencing the sacred induces stormy water. Okay? That's part of the point of the story. You get in the boat with Jesus, and the storms rage. So don't expect calm seas. You won't get them. Pray rather to be a good captain of your boat. Don't pray to avoid the dark night of the soul. Pray rather for the gift of light, to see in the dark. I think, my prejudice, that one of the reasons some people are reluctant to have a contemplative practice is because eventually it means encountering all the stuff we want to keep out there or down there. Water is almost always a symbol of the unconscious in dreams and in stories. It's a symbol for that which we cannot ignore and we can't control. Over and over in the biblical story, water plays such a great part. The great flood, which we'll talk about next Sunday. The parting of the sea in the Exodus story, the sacrament of baptism used by John the Baptist. Water turned into wine. The water here on the stormy sea. So the disciples say, "Who is this guy?" Now, this is important. This is part of the story. He gets out of the boat. And he goes and gets himself crucified. You talk about stormy water. The story is connected to that event. And by his life, Jesus teaches those in the boat that there is a love that protects them from nothing, but sustains them in everything. Now that's a mystical truth you can take to your grave. But before you go there, let's take it into our lives. Let's take it into our living. Let's take it out there. And let's be those who contribute to that community of love and compassion and acceptance. So that those people that we live with and next to don't have so many reasons to be scared. We all long for calm seas and smooth sailing. What our spiritual practice gives us is an anchor and a compass. And that's sufficient. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this: you carry precious cargo on stormy waters. So have a good week, and I'll see you here next Sunday. Thank you.